when you were launching yourself into becoming an actor, were your mom and dad like, were they excited? Were they supportive? Were they questioning what was going on? How did that
Well, I
work
went to
out?
college, they didn't know what I was going to study. They saw me perform a little bit in high school and they thought I had some talent, but my father wanted me to be a doctor, lawyer, professional man. I was a pretty good student. I sloughed off a little bit towards the end of high school. But then when he saw me in things, he was really, he liked what I did and stuff. But my mother just said, her brothers were musicians. She said, just do what you want to do. And they knew I was a hard worker and I was doing pretty well there. But they were concerned, how are you going to make a living?
Right.
And, truth of the matter is, any kind of person who was a minority or a person of color or whatever, you didn't see them represented a lot in movies. You just didn't. There was a few people that were, so a couple black actors. There were some ethnic actors, like Anthony Quinn or something, but you didn't really see a lot of that, until in the 70s. A lot of stuff happened. All kinds of movies were being made. And so movies was far away from me. It wasn't until I went to see people perform in the theater that I thought, well, maybe I could do, what they do.
Well, that's a good transition
you
because
know,
there was a guy that I didn't know about, Joe Paparone.
Joe Paparone from
Yeah, and he was from New Paltz,
yeah.
right?
He's
He
still
was at
he's still a
SUNY. He
friend.
was at
Yeah,
SUNY. He's still a
a
friend.
good friend of mine.
And how did that? So you worked with him as your acting teacher, right?
No,
In
he was.
school.
He helped me. I couldn't get into NYU. I wasn't really polished enough to get into, and I didn't have the money to get into NYU. We barely had, money to go to school. I had a little money that I scraped up, and I got grant, and I got the basic BEOG and tuition assistant program, TAP it was called. And I got in as a departmental admission because I was a late applicant. But he helped me get in, and I had a lot of good teachers there: Richard Bell, Joe Paparone, Beverly Brum, Frank Kratt, Dan
All
Schwartz.
this is all at SUNY New
All
Paltz.
SUNY New Paltz.
SUNY New Paltz.
And Richard Bell and Beverly Brum were more of my acting teachers. Beverly recently passed away, and she actually went to Yale. That's one of the reasons I applied to go to Yale many years later. And she really was a big civilizing influence on me as far as really educating me. She was this woman from Wisconsin. You would think from a very different background, but she was a great teacher. And Joe was very supportive. Matter of fact, Joe Pepper said to me, the first major production there, I was 18, was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he looked at me and said, you should go out for that. And I said, yeah, well, I had never read the book. So he said, read the book. So I started reading the book. He said, you should go out for the Indian because you could play an Indian. Because Italians, basically they played Indians. I mean, no, they did. A lot of them. Anthony Quinn.
That's true.
Was sitting bull, and they died with their boots on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and this was all new for me. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood in Hollis. Then I moved to like a white Italian Irish neighborhood, and everyone thought that I was Puerto Rican, and there wasn't many Puerto Ricans, and they used to harass me And I got bussed out like to an all black junior high school. So I was always, I kind of grown up like as the minority, in many places.
Right.
And it's interesting. When I went to high school, it was a private school, but it was I would say pretty integrated, like 60-40 or something like that. And I've always felt like, when I eventually wound up meeting Spike, for example, we're like 3 weeks apart. I was like, well, this has been going on my whole life. It was like, oh, here's someone, we know each other somehow. Like, and he grew up with all Italians, and I grew up exact opposite of Spike.
And it felt very familiar.
Yeah, and
immediately
we're still very close friends, and he's I value my relationship with him